Hello and welcome to the 27th episode of the Adamola Bookman podcast, the football autobiography podcast. I'm Al and I'm joined by John Coughlin. Hi, Johnny.
Hey Al, how are you doing?
Yeah, just super, John. And this week we're doing one of your own, Johnny, Eamon Dunphy, Only a Game.
How familiar are people in England with Eamon Dunphy?
I think I knew him through this book and through Roy Keane's book, and subsequently I came to know him possibly through you. Not that you introduced me to him, but I don't know, bits and clips of media and stuff, and just having a more Irish view on things. Basically, Johnny, is he known in England? Not at all. No, not at all.
Okay, all right. Because if you follow football in Ireland, and even if you don't, it would be hard to avoid Dunphy if you wanted to. He's quite a big personality. He's probably one of our biggest media personalities of the last 30, 40 years. Famously going back right to the World Cup in 1990, himself and Giles were really against how Charlton played football. Their whole shtick would have been that Ireland had this exceptional group of players, this exceptional generation, and they should be doing better with that group of players. But when you think about the absolute nuclear wasteland of Irish football in the years since, it's funny to think of it.
Yeah.
Talking like that.
Were there many people who agreed with that viewpoint at the time?
I was 6 in World Cup 1990, so I remember being excited, but it's not like I knew what the man on the street was thinking, really. But that point of view was certainly in vogue when Keane, and as you mentioned, Dunphy wrote Keane's first autobiography. I was the ghostwriter, and Keane certainly had that kind of point of view. And so it was very in vogue then for people to kind of just concur with Keane's view that Ireland should have been better under Charlton, and he essentially played a dreadful Sam Allardyce football when we should have been stroking it around the place like some Guardiola team.
Would you rather win or look pretty, though, eh? I mean, it's for time old. I'd rather win, Johnny.
Well, I would rather go to competitions. I think in international football, that's the only thing that really matters ultimately. But we had some really dire years under Trapattoni where the football was so turgid. And Stephen Kenny as well, where the results were just so bad. Kenny was trying to play football and he wasn't doing such a great job at it. So we've had both, I suppose. And certainly, these Charlton years are by far and away the highlight of Irish
That's
football.
it. I mean, Kenny was trying to play football when he didn't have footballers, right? Whereas Charlton was playing hoofball when he did have footballers. So I get it. Very frustrating.
One of the things you always say in England is about this person is a national treasure, that person is a national treasure. And a lot of people don't like Dunphy, but he was on television. There was this trio on Irish TV. Bill O'Hurley was the presenter, and then it was John Giles and Eamon Dunphy. And those guys really were magic. And they were just brilliant. They were good fun. The analysis was already really, really, really good. And I think Irish people always felt like we had better level of analysis. We would watch football, say you'd watch it on Sky because it's whatever game, Sky or BBC, because the sound was always better. And then you'd switch back to Irish television because I think the analysis was always better, and it was a lot less anodyne. People would really say stuff. They'd be really cutting, and Dunphy more so than anyone. And I remember when Souness came on Irish television, he would just be so different than when he was on Sky. He was a lot more entertaining actually because he was able to say more effectively because there was less constraints on them because I guess Sky had to be careful for fear that they pissed off whoever might be listening, no such danger.
It's like foreign players giving interviews in their home country. He's like, oh, the club's shit, and the chairman's a dickhead. Oh, I didn't realise they were going to read about that. Yeah, that's it. Like he said, Irish TV. Well, one last question. You say he's a Marmite character. Do you like him?
I do like Dunphy, yeah. He's very entertaining and he can be a bit sanctimonious at times. And it's funny, he has his own podcast, which is called The Stand. And he has John Giles on. They talk about football, but they also talk a lot about American politics. So it's a much more kind of wide-ranging thing, and I find with Dunphy that he can be really, really cutting towards certain individuals. But then I've noticed when he is with people that he has a lot of respect for, he reminds me a bit of Adam Buxton in this. He's just totally different. He can be a bit I think he can be a bit obsequious with people that he really, really respects, which is funny. It's funny when people are like that. He's such a bollocks, like to so many people, but then he can be really obsequious, I think, depending on the person. But no, sorry, to answer your question, I do like Dunphy. I think he's entertaining. Ultimately, on the whole, I like him. Whereas at times, you get a bit tired of him maybe sometimes, but I do like him, yeah.
It's a dangerous mix, isn't it? Mixing American politics on your sports podcasts. Basically, the only reason I listen to sports podcasts is to get away from American politics. I don't want to hear about it.
What is funny, like, so this book isn't, I didn't get on Kindle. I don't think it's available on Kindle. I got a hard copy, and the cover is him as a young man, but his face is like already like a 70-year-old man's face. He's got this kind of craggy face. It is kind of, I was thinking about it a bit. It is funny to think of Dunphy as a young man because he's always been old.
Yeah, he comes across as quite an old man in this book as well. Like he does.
Like I say, I would have been around in the 90s watching Irish television, and he seemed ancient to me then. This book is called Only a Game, and it was published in 1976, but it was about the 1973-74 season. Am I right?
That's correct.
This is, I guess, famous. As you said, you knew him through this book because this was kind of maybe the first real...
Warts and all, right?
Yeah.
The first warts and all football autobiography. I mean, it is garlanded with praise. On the cover of my book, the best book about football I have ever read by someone that's actually played the game professionally, from no less a football writer than Nick Hornby.
In Ireland, I suppose, he's not primarily associated with this book per se, but he is primarily associated with his journalism and his media personality as opposed to his actual career. He says in the book that he had 25 caps for Ireland, although he was called up, but it can't have been for that many more because his career kind of ended here. So he was an Irish international, but he was playing for. He started out at Manchester United, but he was playing for Millwall here, and subsequently for Charlton and for Reading. So it's not like he's a titan of the game.
I enjoyed this book, but I think it suffers a bit from it was the first book to do this, and I think I've talked about this phenomenon before, and there must be a more handy little phrase for it. But it was the first to be this warts and all football autobiography. But subsequently, I think I read this again and again. I mean, you could fall into like your Steve Claridge was not unlike this book.
Yeah.
It was a real insight into the mentality of a footballer as opposed to the game. There's not a lot else in here, to be honest. There's nothing about his family and stuff.
Yeah, and it is a bit repetitive, isn't it? There's a few topics that he just doesn't leave alone. As a matter of fact, there's a couple of topics that he really picks up in the Keane book. Himself and Johnny Giles used to always talk about moral courage, which is essentially, guys who put their foot on the ball and they're there for a pass in difficult times. This book is dedicated to the good pro. There's a lot of that, and he comes back to it over and over again, and he's always coming back to the fact that Millwall has got a lot of good pros, and not necessarily good players, but dedicated individuals. And he does.
And this is some of the sanctimony you were talking about earlier, I think, because he very much includes himself as one of the good pros. Oh, well, absolutely. If everyone was like him, well, man, they'd all be good.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that is implied, isn't it?
I think a little bit. I'm not saying he's particularly self-aggrandizing, but he certainly numbers himself as one of the good pros.
He does, and he is pretty cutting about himself in other ways. But okay, shall we just get into the thing? Like, it starts with the start of the season, right? It starts in July, actually, in pre-season. So he's playing for Millwall. Millwall had a couple of years previous to that nearly been promoted to the first division. So if this was 1973. Millwall had never been in the first division. As we know from the Cascarina book, they were subsequently promoted. And I think where this book actually would have been much better is if the season was just better.
Or completed. It's
Yeah,
half a story, it feels to
yeah.
me.
I was like, I think there's like 200 odd pages, or just under 200 pages in this book. And I was 100 pages through it, and it was the 15th of October. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute.
Well, I did worse than that because I did that thing where I was like, look at the text. How much longer have I got? So I flicked to the back to see how much was text because there's a lot of statistics at the end of a book. And I just sort of flicked on the wrong page and it was like, today I joined Charlton. And it was like January. I was like, what the fuck have I done? What? I kind of ruined the book. I spoiled it. And I just like had picked up it like, today I joined Charlton. It's like, oh. By the way, Charlton Athletic with their 75,000 capacity stadium in 1973. 75,000.
Wow. Yeah,
Can
he
you
said
imagine playing in that in the third division in front of 1,500 players? So, wow.
the book is very good, and he is a nice writer. So let me just read a bit to you here. So this is the entry from the 3rd of August. My birthday. I'm 28, getting a tiny bit worried. This is going to be the big season. It has to be. There may not be many more. 28, the age when insecurity, like a slowly descending fog, appears on the horizon. One is conscious of little things. The apprentices begin to seem absurdly young. You call them son now, and yet it doesn't seem so long since older players addressed you the same way. Players you played with or against are getting jobs as managers or retiring. The manager begins to consult you more often. What do you think? What do you think of this and that? It's flattering, of course. You've grown up, but you're growing old too, at least in football terms. You talk more of babies and not so much of birds. You begin to wonder what is coming from the Provident Fund about a testimonial, sometimes a night about retirement, the end. How much longer will you spend your summers in this idyllic way, dreaming of glory? Of course, you reassure yourself that this is your prime. It's a shock to realize how rapid the descent is from pinnacle to valley. So it is really nice in parts, isn't it? But that kind of mindset there, and this is kind of what the Cascarino book is kind of famous for. Is that is what the book is, isn't it? This is a player who is kind of, he's entering the end days really, and it's really plaguing him. But he's a nice writer.
Raging against the dying of the light, isn't he?
Exactly,
That's what he is doing.
Yeah. But he is a nice writer, isn't he?
No, he is a nice writer. And yeah, that's it. I started writing down quotes at the start, and then I realized I'm not going to be able to do this because it is full of lovely writing. It genuinely is. And it is funny at points. It says, again, this is a quote by Nick Hornby, uproariously funny. And I tell you what, at the start of the book, Johnny, I laughed out loud in public reading it. And I was like, wow, I'm onto a good thing here. But I didn't laugh again.
What was the laugh out loud moment?
I'll talk you through the story. So they had a coach called Laurie, and they were doing a little running test, and he was measuring it on his stopwatch. And then at the end of it, we were like, hang on a sec, how come this fat fuck is faster than this guy? And the Laurie guy goes, oh, I must have been pressing the watch wrong. And so immediately he loses all his integrity and all his respect, and they're all jeering him. And then the next day they come in and they find this graph that's been drawn up on the wall by this poor coach, Laurie. And it starts to get a bit sad, really. And so there's like, well, the board ended up on the wall, then it ended up on the ceiling, then it ended up on the floor, then it ended up being kicked around the football pitch by two of the players. But then the coach comes in, this Laurie's like, where's the graph? And they're all smirking. He's like, my kid made that, my kid. And I felt his pain. I did, but I laughed at it at the same time. He made this lovely little project with his kid. Oh, the lads will appreciate this graph, lads. This is what you do with your training. And then they destroyed it.
Yeah, he said something like his kid was so excited to make this graph for his heroes, the Millwall footballers. I think he said, well, there'll be no more graphs from me and my son or something like that,
right? There's something to think about tonight, lads, trying to go to sleep. What do we do to poor Laurie's son?
That was funny.
So that did make me laugh. And then there was subsequently some practical jokes played on a young professional, Gordon Hill, which honestly, the way they were written, I thought it was going to end up tragically.
It ended up tragically for Dunphy because Gordon Hill went to Man United.
Well, that's it. Gordon Hill was the only player who actually subsequently went on to have a proper career, didn't he? Actually, even played for England. It's not a name I remember in any way, but yeah, Man United.
It's funny because Dunphy, he's a cerebral individual. Then he revels in this kind of frattish behavior around this young boy. This Gordon Hill guy is like 19, and they're essentially just kind of, well, they're bullying him, aren't they?
Well, they are bullying, but they're not physically bullying him. It's all a bit of teasing, isn't it? They convince him that a journalist is trying to interview him because he's actually quite good at tennis as well as football. And the journalist keeps ringing up. It's one of his teammates to say, "Oh, I can't make it today. I can't make it today," but asking him about other players on the team as well, finding out his opinion. And then
Yeah.
they all tease him to he's like pretending to play shots and a thing, looking like a right knobhead.
Well, that bit was funny, where they got him to play an imaginary game in the hotel lobby with one of the other players, and then every time he took a shot, they'd be just shouting out. That was funny. Dunphy doesn't like this guy Hill. He thinks interestingly, he said Best was like this. Best was kind of always kind of aloof and on the edge of the group, never part of the group. But he wasn't as gullible as Gordon Hill.
Wasn't as naive. Yeah, I thought I picked up on that.
But he says that at some point, this thing with Hill goes on for the first few weeks of the season, and then eventually Hill is doing well. You can see it's getting to Dunphy that Hill is doing well, and Dunphy keeps saying that he should be out of the team, but then he's scoring goals, and then suddenly he's no longer, because he was referring to him all the time as Gordon Hill in his full name, and then suddenly he was Hilly, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. I didn't pick up on that.
Because he obviously was just at some point accepted by the wider group, and Dunphy, he would be known in Ireland as having a very kind of strong personality, but he just loves being part of the group, doesn't he? Which surprised me. He loves it.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, absolutely. So revels in it.
So when Hill was eventually taken into the warm bosom of the Millwall players, especially some older pro, then I think Dunphy would have come around to it eventually, which I thought was interesting. So another thing, sorry, this is another quote, and I'll spare you too many quotes, but he says, "One of sport's saddest sounds is the whine of yesterday's men making unfavorable comparisons between the awful present and their glorious past." It's funny to hear Dunphy saying that. Dunphy very famously in Ireland called Cristiano Ronaldo a cod. He hated Ronaldo for years, but he eventually climbed down on that. Ronaldo, that time was kind of on the kind of stratospheric level,
Equally, Bobby Moore gets it in the neck, eh? That's fascinating because as an English fella, all you hear is just pure gold about Bobby Moore. But they play a pre-season friendly against West Ham, and Bobby Moore's not there because he's off doing some media commitment, some sort of superstar style program.
Well, it's some kind of intersport competition, isn't it?
Yeah, some televised thing they used to have in the 70s, which involved Kevin Keegan falling off a bike, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he absolutely tore strips off Bobby Moore for that. Not a professional, not a good football man. Yeah, not a good pro. Too busy doing other stuff. And I've never heard a bad word about Bobby Moore.
He absolutely hates West Ham. He hates West Ham.
Yeah, he really does hate West Ham. And he was wrong about them. They turned out to be a half-decent side, I think it turned out.
Well, what he says is they can turn it on and be a wonderful team on the day, but they'll never win. They'll never kind of be able to put together a string of results because they're a bunch of fancy dans, I suppose, ultimately.
Yeah, and the direct opposite of that was Leeds United. The way he wrote about Leeds was actually, I think, the most interesting thing of the book. He talks about getting a throw-in against Leeds, how he won a throw-in, and all the Leeds players mark up tight. They're all so disciplined. They're there, everything. They're getting at you. And he says at the end, you get a throw-in, and he says, "Oh, for pity's sake." I just thought that was lovely. They can't even take a throw-in against Leeds.
Yeah.
And that's how he says, they don't beat you with the football. They beat you by beating you, and then they beat you at football. Oh, it was brilliant. They sounded absolutely terrifying, that Leeds team.
Because, as I said, Dunphy and Giles are so, they're kind of thought as a bit of a duo in Ireland. You can't think of one without the other. But it's always Dunphy kind of worshipped Giles. He says, he said at one stage, and this is a soundbite in Second Captains, maybe you've heard it, Johnny Giles has the best football mind in the world.
That I have heard it, and I've always wondered who that was. Yeah, okay, that was Dunphy.
I believe so. Dunphy saying that about Giles, yeah.
So we talk about the pre-season training camp, and Millwall go down to Bournemouth. But he mentions that he was angry about this because Hendon, who the fuck, went to Spain. But Leighton Orient for pre-season training in 1973 went to the fucking Bahamas. That blew my fucking mind. I don't know anything about old-time football. I don't know anything about it. Charlton Athletic played in a 75,000 seat stadium, and that fucking Leighton Orient went to the Bahamas for pre-season. What the fuck was going on? Honestly.
Did you see as well? I thought of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in the preface. Dunphy said something, whatever it was, about some rule change, and he said that the game was gone.
Yeah, the game's gone. I wrote that down. I thought, is that the first time? Is this the first the game's gone? I think it must be, Johnny.
It was a new preface for a second edition or third edition or whatever in 1986.
Well, it's still a 1986 game's gone. Surely it must be an early game's gone.
Oh, it's an early game's gone. Yeah,
I highlighted that straight away. Game's gone, Eamon. Ooh.
Yeah. So it's a diary style, as we said. He's a funny character, isn't he? He's in a way, Al, kind of reminded me a bit of myself.
Oh, really, Johnny?
As in he's a bit of a whiny fucker, isn't he?
He just wants things done the way he likes them done, right?
I think he holds people to high standards, but then he himself might have been quite difficult, I think. Like he describes earlier on how in the previous season he was put out of the first 11 and he just left. He walked out of training immediately. So I'd say he was prickly enough character.
Yeah, I'd say so. You get that from his manager's attitude towards him, I think. His manager being Benny Fenton, who is about as proper old football man as you could possibly be in the world.
Yeah, and he says in the new preface, the 1986 preface, that is, that he hopes that he wasn't unkind to Benny Fenton, because if there's a hero in this book, it's Benny Fenton. But I didn't think, I read that before I read the rest of the text, of course, but I couldn't see how you would have read that text and thought that Dunphy had anything other than a lot of respect for Fenton, even if he was a bit of a pain in the ass for Fenton half the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he points out he likes Benny Fenton a number of times in the book, but Benny Fenton, he just refers to him as Benny. But Benny is a good man and is a good heart.
But Laurie never really recovers, does he? He has no respect whatsoever for Laurie.
I really wondered about this. I mean, I wonder, if you were to read this book, would you be able to give this coach Laurie a job? No.
No way. Well, first of all, he's a goalkeeper, and apparently goalkeepers know nothing about football, according to Dunphy.
Well, Nuno Espirito Santo will have a little word with you about that, my friend. Fifth in the league.
Yeah. At the very start, I was thinking, okay, this is great. There's a story, there's a narrative in this book, and there isn't in very many of the books that we've done. There is a bit in Cascarino, Grincha, but there often isn't, right? This is my life. Yeah. So there's not a kind of an arc. And I was thinking, this is going to be interesting. But for reasons that we'll get to, it kind of peters out the actual storyline because, well, they didn't do very well. He says, we're going to be good this year. We've got all these good pros. We were good a couple of years ago. This is the year we're going to go up. And I kind of have a feeling if that did happen, it would have been a great book. But I suppose in a way, the fact that it went so poorly, you do see a different side of the game, as it were.
I think maybe the fact it went poorly is the point. Rather than a book about how you're incredible glory, this is a book about real football and the football that 95% of pros experience, just trying to make a living, trying to get through the game, any little bit of glory. I think maybe the failure is the point in a way.
It's called Only a Game, ? So between the timing of it in terms of his career and, as you said, the ultimate kind of failure is I guess, ultimately what makes it interesting.
Well, it is. I mean, at the start of the book, there he is. He believes that this is the best Millwall team he's played in. This is the team that's getting him to promoted. And basically, 3 months later, he's totally dispirited and he's left the club. I mean, that's the story, right? Just how quickly this shit goes down.
And what was interesting as well is he's put out of the team at one point and he immediately goes to the manager and says, I want to leave. And I thought back in the day, footballers were essentially kind of like shackled to their club and there was nothing that they could do, but apparently not. You could just go in and throw throw a bit of a hissy fit and get out if you wanted,
Yeah, that is an interesting one because you always hear that with like before the Bosman rule in players just trapped at their club for 100 years. I think there was an old football big like Nicky Summerby's dad or granddad. There was three Summerbys who all played professional footballer, and I think I read one of them. And their grandfather was just stuck at a club for like 15 years, never getting a rise, never getting.
Oh, really? It's like Fritzl's basement or something.
Very much so.
Yeah. Did you like that line? He says, so the club captain, this guy, Dennis Burnett, he doesn't show up early on because he's angling to leave, again, on the topic that we were saying. He's kind of faffing about and he's kind of trying to engineer a move. And Dunphy doesn't like this Burnett character, but he says that they're just kind of different kind of people. But he says that once they start playing in midfield together, in fact, it was Burnett didn't really like Dunphy because Dunphy's kind of a little bit more of a baller, if you want. He was kind of a silkier player maybe than some of the other fellas because they're in the second division, right? The old second division. So what would be the championship now? But Burnett and Dunphy came to be a little bit closer, at least in a footballing sense, because they were playing in midfield together. And he says, playing football together is make you know someone as intimately as if you were making love to them, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at things.
I wonder how his midfield partners felt about that little line, especially in the 70s, reading that book. Although it was obviously a little bit of hyperbole there. Like, you can see the understanding that would come from playing with someone in a partnership like that.
I'm not the most direct person, right? You've probably known this about me over the years. And I find when I make a real decision that I'm going to be direct about something, I often get it really, really wrong, And so this Dennis Burnett guy doesn't show up. And the players are demanding action from Benny. And Benny's, he's similar to me possibly. He's not the most direct person. So he comes in. So they're all like, you need to do something about this. And so your man Dennis comes in the next day. And so Benny goes over, confronts him. And he comes back and he's like, yeah, I've sent him home for the week. Okay, great. What was wrong? His kid had meningitis. Like, no, Benny. No, Benny. Don't do that, Benny.
Yeah, then the lads came round a bit.
That was dreadful. Yeah, then they ended up essentially talking Benny to kind of reverse out of that decision.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. But then you see poor Benny, he's losing face here. Every which way he turns, you can't do right for doing wrong.
And significantly, Dunphy would talk about, we needed 2 points today. Here's a question for you, Alan. What year did 3 points for a win come into English football?
75, 76.
1981.
1981, no kidding. Forest won the league with two. I should have known that, really. 1981. Well, that was a good decision, wasn't it?
Yeah.
On the West Ham thing, Johnny, I've got some more quotes because they are absolutely crazy. West Ham have never had the commitment necessary to win a league title. They have all the aristocratic qualities, indolence and an unwillingness to sweat. And Ron Greenwood, who went on to be the England manager over Brian Clough, I felt sorry for him. Oh, that's the worst thing you can say, isn't it? The worst thing you can say. I felt sorry for him. Well, it didn't do him any harm, did it?
This idea of a club having a DNA or an identity or whatever is very current with Spurs, isn't it? Have they ever been more Spursy like?
Poor Spurs. Poor Ange. I wanted to work out for him. Give him time.
Everybody does. I think everybody wants it to work out for Ange, but I have a feeling it's not going to.
No. Cole Palmer just fucking stabbed a dagger in his chest with that Panenka at the weekend. Like, bloody hell. Yeah, best Panenka ever. Best I've ever seen live. Whoa.
Just on Giles. Like, Giles would be seen as a serious man. Like charming, but quite serious. It's kind of the granddad of Irish football, if you want, but kind of a serious granddad. But there's a story about the Dunphy relays. So Dunphy's going off to play for Ireland, and he talks about what it's like playing for Ireland, etc. And he mentions Shea Brennan. If I'm not mistaken, Shea Brennan won the European Cup with Manchester United in 1968, and he was rooming with John Giles. And Shea Brennan, he said something like, the people you meet Like, these are relationships that you'll have forever. I'll always remember how once when I had to leave early to go back to Manchester, John Giles got up. Giles apparently loved bed, still mad for bed. John got up in the middle of the night to wave me off from the windows I was getting into a taxi. It turns out Dunphy got this story from Giles, and Giles had actually gotten up to dump a bucket of ice water over Shea Brennan's head as he walked out the hotel front door. But when he saw Brennan was with some coach, he couldn't do it, so he just stood there in the dark, just waiting.
What a man saw. Get out of his bed to wave me goodbye. Yeah, that was nice.
So in the actual season, they get 1 point from their first 4 games, and then they win two on the trot.
Which is remarkably sanguine about as well. The first 4 games, he's just feeling out the season. He doesn't mind losing those first 4 games.
Yeah, it's maybe then you could win the league if you manage to win like 10 games. It's not like it is now, apparently.
No, but they got the league. They got the final league table at the back of the book, so it was interesting to look at.
They came 12th.
Yeah, Carlisle got promoted. What the fuck? He was right about Carlisle. That was something he was right about. They were good.
So yeah, they lose unexpectedly to Carlisle after they put together these 2 wins, and Dunphy gets dropped. But yeah, Carlisle were apparently really good, and everybody was real shocked. It's funny because in a few of the games he says things like, "We always beat Carlisle at home. We never win away to whatever team." And it seems he does say at some point that a lot of the kind of the 30 minutes before you go out on the field, you kind of know sometimes, a lot of the time, if you're going to win. A lot of it seems to be in the head. So they'd already made up their mind that they were going to beat Carlisle, but they were wrong.
Yeah, he really sees a club not as a collection of players who he's going to play against. He's playing against the club and what that club stands for. He really does seem to have an idea of what every club is. Even though the playing staff changes, right? Managers change. He still has an idea. Every club has a fixed status. As you say, West Ham Academy, Spurs, Spursy.
And Millwall definitely he sees as having a very set identity, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Which is essentially the Den is really hard to play at, is Millwall's identity. Did you enjoy the Forest? They're in this quite a bit, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. No, I didn't. Genuinely, I take it personally. Before I was even born. Yeah, Forest are one of the teams they convincingly beat, which annoyed me.
Well, they have 3 games in a couple of weeks against Forest because they draw with them in the league. Or sorry, they lose to them in the league. Then they draw with them in an early round of the League Cup, and then they beat them in the replay. But then
that's for 3-0, right? I wasn't mistaken about that.
And then he says what was really interesting, and this is one for the good pros. So they beat that Forest team 3-0, and after they lost the Forest in the league, he was saying, "We are better than them, and we knew we beat them next time around, even though they only drew. They beat them the 3rd time of asking." But this is just before Clough comes back. There's rumor that Clough is returning, and they're all talking about this. So there he is plugging away at Millwall, beating this team. And then some of those guys in that team, as we know, won the European Cup. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Also, again, this was an interesting to get the contemporaneous viewpoint on Clough and Allison as well. Malcolm Allison was the other guy who comes up who's, still a big name, but not the same as Clough. But yeah, that was fascinating, wasn't it? The players, apparently they're in a restaurant. Was it in a restaurant? And they were having a genuine row, and all the players love Cloughy, and all the management and the chairman hated him. That was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's ultimately what led to the final falling out between Dunphy and Benny Fenton, because he writes about it. And then Benny Fenton writes in the program notes, attacking Dunphy. But
I mean, that was astonishing. I mean, it was Dunphy. Well, it was attacking Dunphy through Clough, wasn't it? In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Because you saw these different viewpoints. That's it. Seeing as aloof, Georgie Best, aloof but not naive. Bobby Moore, the yeah, bad pro, and then yeah, the division of the thought between about Clough, and to a lesser extent Malcolm Allison. I did find very instructive.
The manager's view of Clough was that he was a checkbook manager.
Which is yeah, patently absurd.
What I thought was fun was his description of the contradiction in players' attitudes to journalists. And sorry, this is one of the other themes he returns all the time, that people who don't play football don't know anything about football. And this comes up when he talks with, Ken Early from the Second Captains, who's a journalist, not a player. So he's still banging that particular drum. So he's saying they don't know anything about football, but then at the same time, players are absolutely flattered by any attention from journalists, and the fact that somebody has come to write about them and specifically really gets players going. I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and probably more true in the second division in the 70s as well, where you are more starved of that celebrity than. I'm sure modern players now aren't so delighted to see a journalist popping up. See old Cole Palmer, like, oh, fabulous! Is that Henry Winter? Hello.
We've talked about this before, how the football is rarely the interesting part. The actual kicking of a ball on a field is rarely the interesting part of these books. You think when he's talking about Millwall playing against Carlisle in the 1970s or whatever, did you find that stuff interesting, the actual football parts?
No, not really. We know all that, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem with the book, which is a good book. It sets it all up very nicely. You're excited for it, and then you see it fall apart. But it does get a bit moribund in the middle. It's just another game. And generally, it's a 1-1 with fucking somebody shit. It's very difficult. Oh, let's see, how did they get on against Cardiff or something? It's like, who cares?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt it was a bit of a slog, some of the games, and this is when I started looking at the dates and realizing, wait a minute, it's only October. Is this going to go on in this format until like the middle of May?
Well, it really did make you wonder, as you said. Yeah, you're there like, I haven't got much book left. Yeah, and here we are, November. Well, what the fuck happened in the second half of the season? And as you know, the whole second half of the season was called off. But no, it wasn't. He just went to Charlton.
What happens is the captain leaves Dennis Burnett leaves for Hull, and two spicy young fullbacks come in from Spurs and Arsenal, and they do well. And Burnett is out, but Benny has essentially decided that it's time to get rid of the old guard. There's a purge. The other thing was, because these names mean nothing to me, like none of them. He said Harry is out, Alfie is out. It's like, oh yeah, Alfie, yeah, we mentioned him. Harry,
Harry. Old Kitch. Old Kitch.
Record appearance holder for Millwall. At least he was in 1976. But he purges all the old guard, and of course this includes Dunphy. Dunphy is all throughout the season. Dunphy's kind of in and out. And I suppose maybe what was interesting at the time was, much like the kind of Cascarina book, you kind of get an insight into his thoughts on how it feels to be out of the team.
I mean, it's miserable being out of a team, isn't it, back in those days? Because, as I say, now it is a squad game. It was not a squad game in those days. One substitute only.
Do you want to come as the 13th man? No.
Even getting substituted was a real, kick in the teeth, wasn't it, for these lads? Like, oh, I got brought off. Unbelievable. Manager doesn't show faith in me.
Yeah, like that. Like, I talk about the changes in football. Like, we obviously complain about VAR, but substitutes was a good decision.
Yeah, it was. Yellow, red cards, good. 3 points for a win. You've done it again. Well done.
Back pass one.
Yeah, that was fun. It's nuts watching old football now, isn't it? You've seen just like, knock it back to a keeper. He's fucking picked it up. What's he doing? No, just bouncing it. Get on with it, lad.
He goes in and he speaks to Benny, and he calls, because he's out of the team, and he tells Benny that he's a con man. And Benny says, do you mean that? And he says, yeah, that's it. We're done. We had a relationship and it's over.
The word con man just didn't seem, I don't know, but I mean, apparently that was an incredibly harsh thing to say back then.
Well, Benny was a bit of a wheeler dealer character. Maybe if you said to Harry Redknapp that he was a con man, he'd really take it hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed harsh. I mean, all the time, I liked Benny. All the way through the book, Benny just seemed like a good egg, doing what he
Well, he
could.
should have. I think he should have gotten rid of that Laurie character early enough, just on the basis of what Dunphy was saying, because, well, that Laurie guy seemed to have. He was up against it with those players because they didn't rate him. But regardless, they were never gonna. They're never gonna work for him, even if they're being jerks about it. You know.
He's the only guy he absolutely destroys in the book.
His name is Laurie Leslie. The reason he got really upset is because Laurie was handing out bibs, and he gave in training, and he was in training. The first team would play against the reserves, say, and he was giving the first team players their bibs, and Dunphy didn't get a bib, and that was the first he learned about it, and that's why he was so upset with Benny, because Benny should say to his face like a man, but he had failed to do that.
Yeah. But then this is the hardest part of being a manager, right? This is what they all say. It's tell them the disappointed players, and lots of them avoid it.
I thought this was interesting. Benny would sooner stab a friend in the back than have a difficult decision with a fella that he doesn't get along with.
Yeah, so he's portraying Benny as really weak there, isn't he? It's not very complimentary.
He's a total
And as he
weakling.
says, he's terrified Benny will lose his job because he'll never get another one. Just like, bloody hell.
Benny didn't last much longer. Very helpfully in the kind of postscript, they kind of tell you how all the characters, how it all panned out for them later.
I really think that was essential to the story, frankly, because as I say, it felt like half the story, and I did need to know the rest. And it was very gratifying to read the rest of the story. There are some interesting things at the end of the book, aren't there? Because as this is the 40th anniversary edition, it was originally imagined as going to be a book from the viewpoint of a player and a journalist
And a fan.
and a fan. But they cut that out. And there's one point where the journalist talks to him about a particular game. Was it a Sheffield Wednesday game where they won 1-0?
Yeah. They won it luckily, according to the journalist, right?
Well, that's it. In the book, Dunphy describes it, how they put the screws on Wednesday, and it was just a matter of till they cracked. And, with 2 minutes to go, they did. And then the journalist says to Dunphy, well, the best team lost. And at that point, I think it sounds like that's where the whole project ended, because Dunphy was like, what? No, 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 no. And yeah, the journalist was like, you can't tell a player that he's had a bad game if he thinks he's had a good one. It was very interesting, like how Dunphy just shut down that.
And what was interesting as well, in a different point in the book, Dunphy, he was out with a team and he was in the stand, and he was saying, well, you see so much more from the stand. You see a lot that you wouldn't see when you're playing, which is kind of contradictory to this whole position.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
And I also thought, well, thank God they didn't put that bit in with the journalist, because it would we say every book is short. If they went through a full season with the entry that fella did for that Wednesday game, the book would be about 600 pages long.
It would be, and it wouldn't be the official tome of football autobiographies, would it? It would have been, I think, forgotten. It had to be from Dunphy's viewpoint. That's what makes it interesting.
And so then his former international teammate, Theo Foley, is the manager of Charlton. And as we say, Dunphy is obsessed with the personality of any given club. And Charlton are one that he always thought were like rubbish shit, essentially. But he went there. He said it just felt nice to be wanted. And he went down to the third division. And then the diary ends like he's like exploring Antarctica with Scott or something like that. We'll just nip out here for a minute. You know what I mean?
Oh, incidentally, the manager who signed him for Charlton was, in fact, someone's name I recognised. Theo Foley was George Graham's assistant. I remember that. Actually,
once on Irish television, Dunphy was criticising whichever manager, and Graham Souness said, well, who have you ever managed? And Dunphy, I think he must have practiced this line, because that was an obvious thing to throw. Dunphy said, I've managed to stay alive for 65 and a half years, baby, or something like that, But it does say in the postscript, it explains that after he went to Charlton, he went to Reading, and then he went back to Ireland, and he coached when John Giles was essentially trying to establish Shamrock Rovers as a European power. And Dunphy went to be part of that, and he coached the Shamrock Rovers youth team. And he was also coaching the Ireland youth team. And he did apply to be the manager of Millwall and sent a letter when the job came up, but it went to George Graham.
Yeah. All right, that's about it, right?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a bit of a slog at times. I'm happy I read it because we're in the business of reading footballers' autobiographies, and this is, yeah. I guess we've said it genre defining, but yeah, it's one of the high watermarks, I suppose, of this whole genre.
Yeah, this is like a 2001 space odyssey of football autobiography books. It was the first. It may have been done better since.
Oh, it's definitely been done better since, absolutely.
But it is an interesting insight into second division 1970s football. This is a very niche podcast, isn't it, Johnny?
It is a niche book. Cascarino's book is absolutely done on this kind of format, isn't it? With the kind of diary entries and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what I mean. It is the 2001 space odyssey of football autobiographies. It broke ground, but subsequently people have done it more and flashier.
Yeah. But I enjoyed it. I would say I would give this 3.5, maybe 3.5 out of 5 to be generous.
I was there, 3.5 out of 5. It is a good book.
Wait,
3.5 smashed graphs out of 5.
Yeah, 3.5 smashed graphs out of 5 seems fair.
Poor Laurie. And poor Laurie's kid. I wonder what he's doing now, still broken. I bet he's not in the graph making business. Two more things. But we just talk about traveling to games. At one point, there was a chess craze. There's a chess craze on the bus. And at other times, he knew players who'd lost as much as £20 in a game of cards. Oh, yeah, bandit.
Game is gone.
Game's gone. Courtesy Dunphy. Yeah, so next time we're gearing up to the new year with the big hitters, aren't we, Johnny? Who's coming next? In fact, Johnny, can we toss a coin?
Yeah, okay.
Will it be Messi or will it be Ronaldo next? So this is showing we have no preference. We're neutral.
Do you have a coin?
Find a coin. I'm going to find a coin, listeners. There's one close. I know it. Okie dokie, Johnny.
Heads for Messi, tails for Cristiano. And so these are the
heads for Messi, tails for Cristiano Ronaldo. Okay.
So there's two books, right? They're both by Guillaume Balaguer. Is that how you say his name? Guillaume Balag.
Yeah, I think it's Balaguer, isn't it? I think you're right there.
All right. So heads for Messi. Go on.
2002 Louisiana Quarter. Heads for Messi, tails for Ronaldo. Next episode, it will be Lionel Messi by Guillaume Balaguer.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's great. All right. Well, thank you very much. Please do like and subscribe. And if you're willing, please leave a comment on these things. I believe this is all good.
Well, yeah, we will see you again in 2 weeks with Lionel Messi's life story. I'm kind of interested.
Yeah, I am.
I don't know very much what happened to Messi between the time he was born and when he was 12. I know everything else. But I'm looking forward to catching up on Lionel Messi, the infant. What was he up to? Like baby Jesus.
Yeah,
all right,
okay.
Well,
all right,
thanks again, Johnny. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, indeed.
Let your body spin like there is nothing in life but dancing. I can't keep my hands off you, as if this look like glue.